In an exclusive interview with CBS News, President Trump insisted his coronavirus response is working. After that interview, he called a news conference in the Rose Garden where he announced new sanctions on China and repeatedly called out presumptive Democratic nominee Joe Biden. Here is senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge with more on her exclusive conversation with the president.
Is COVID-19 the greatest threat to your reelection?
I don't know. I've done a great job, and now I have to do it again. I was sailing to a win, sailing. We were sailing right into a win. We had the greatest economy ever for our country and for the world.
President Trump accused his presumptive rival, former Vice President Joe Biden, of already damaging the country's recovery.
The possibility that Joe Biden gets elected, that's a huge downward pull on the stock market.
You say that's affecting the stock market right now?
Oh, absolutely. The stock market would be much higher, except for the fact that if he got in, the stock market will crash.
The president criticized his challenger's choice of face coverings after he wore a mask for the first time in public this past weekend at a military hospital.
Would you urge Americans to wear a mask?
If it's necessary, I would urge him to wear a mask, and I would say follow the guidelines.
Why has it become such a political issue?
It is a political issue for a lot of people. It's not a political issue for me. I would wear it if I'm in contact with people, if I'm close to people.
And the president insisted schools should open on time.
The Los Angeles School District is the latest and one of the largest in the country to say they're not going back to school in the fall.
Mistake.
What do you tell parents and teachers who feel that it's unsafe to go back?
I would tell parents and teachers that you should find yourself a new person, whoever's in charge of that decision, because it's a terrible decision. Because children and parents are dying from that trauma, too. They're dying because they can't do what they're doing. Mothers can't go to work because all of a sudden they have to stay home and watch their child, and fathers. We have to open our schools. We have learned one thing very strongly. Young people are in great shape when it comes to the coronavirus.
Mr. Trump said his political opponents want to keep schools closed to stop his reelection.
They figure if they can delay school openings till after November 3rd, they have an advantage in the polls. I don't think so, because Joe Biden has been a failure.
And after recent controversy, President Trump defended the right to display the Confederate flag.
With me, it's freedom of speech, very simple. Like it, don't like it, it's freedom of speech.
Would you be comfortable with your supporters displaying the Confederate battle flag at political events?
You know, it depends on what your definition is, but I am comfortable with freedom of speech. It's very simple.
You understand why the flag is a painful symbol for many people, because it's a reminder of slavery.
Well, people love it, and I know people that like the Confederate flag, and they're not thinking about slavery. I look at NASCAR, you go to NASCAR, you had those flags all over the place, they stopped it. I just think it's freedom of speech, whether it's Confederate flags or Black Lives Matter or anything else you want to talk about. It's freedom of speech.
Let's talk about George Floyd. You said George Floyd's death was a terrible thing.
Terrible.
Why are African Americans still dying at the hands of law enforcement in this country?
And so are white people. So are white people. What a terrible question to ask. So are white people. More white people, by the way. More white people.
Research suggests that black people are about 3 times more likely to be killed by police than white people. But the overall number of white people killed is higher because white people make up a larger percentage of the overall population. The president also made news on China, saying for now he does not want to continue trade talks.
Look, we made a great trade deal, but as soon as the deal was done, the ink wasn't even dry, and they hit us with the plague. Okay? So right now, I'm not interested in talking to China about another deal. I'm interested in doing other things with China.
And how will you hold the Chinese government accountable for COVID-19?
You'll see. You'll see. It's not for you. It's for me.
But you will hold them accountable.
You'll see.
And for more on this, I'm joined by Skyler Henry at the White House. Hi, Skyler. So President Trump gave a press conference in the Rose Garden yesterday where he announced sanctions against China. Tell us about that and why many are calling his remarks a campaign speech.
Hey, Tanya. So the sanctions are on Chinese officials, businesses, and banks that help China restrict Hong Kong's autonomy there. He also went on to say that he is not proud of what China has done in terms of, to use his words, their oppressive actions against the people of Hong Kong. And so he brought forward this act. He also signed an executive order saying that Hong Kong will now be treated like the rest of mainland China as well. And that is where the conversation sort of shifted towards his address to China. And then it started to go to what a lot of people, at least critics at least, have said have become somewhat of a campaign speech, a stumping of sorts, where he said that former Vice President Joe Biden, who is the presumptive Democratic nominee, he said that his career essentially has been a gift to the Chinese Communist Party. And then he went on to say Joe Biden's name a multitude of times, using a similar rhetoric that he's used in several campaign speeches or that we've seen as he's been on the campaign trail. Obviously, the most recent one was canceled because of bad weather up in the New England area. But a lot of the rhetoric that we heard yesterday in the Rose Garden is what we would typically hear from the president while he is on the campaign trail. And you take into consideration the fact that he mentioned Joe Biden so many times. I actually asked the question rhetorically at first, but then actually just for some historical context, if a president has ever used a platform in this manner, in this way, in the Rose Garden to address his political rival as he is seeking re-election there. But when you think about what he said, he mentioned Vice President Joe Biden. He mentioned Joe Biden's son Hunter and his relationship to Burisma, the Ukrainian energy company that was at the center of the scandal and the fallout that led to President Trump and all of the issues that happened earlier this year in terms of him being impeached. And so when you take all of those issues into consideration, it did start to sound like a campaign speech. And then he went on to shame China, essentially saying that they are the reason that the coronavirus has spread the way it did and that they failed to or that they were concealing the virus altogether. And so when you take all of that rhetoric into consideration, it did start to sound like he was playing to his base there, using the Rose Garden as a stump of sorts to appeal to some of his supporters there to say, hey, listen, we're doing a great job here in terms of how we've handled the situation, particularly the coronavirus pandemic and the fallout thereafter. He's mentioned the 45 million tests that America has done, saying that they're one of the best, if not the best country in the world in terms of testing. And that is why you're starting to see these spiking cases throughout the country here. But I think a lot of people wanted to hear and see a plan, to hear and see if the Trump administration, particularly the president, if he was going to do something to address the growing number of coronavirus cases happening across the country in states like Texas, in California, and in Florida. Tanya.
And Skyler, the president is visiting Georgia today to talk about infrastructure. But Georgia is also a new battleground state for the upcoming presidential election. In fact, the latest CBS News Battleground Tracker poll shows Georgia as a toss-up. So tell us a little bit more about the president's visit to Georgia and what he's hoping to accomplish there.
Yeah, so this is one of those two birds, one stone sort of things where the president is going down there to Atlanta, to the UPS facility at the Atlanta airport to essentially announce a new federal rule that will fast track the review process to build things like highways and gas pipelines and other major pieces of infrastructure here. It goes into the White House's Rebuild America plan. But the critics here are saying that because of this fast track, it'll actually reduce the public's opportunity to have the ability to review these projects and to see if they are appropriate environmentally. And so you're starting to see a lot of critics come out and say that he's going against policies and acts that have been in place for decades now with trying to expedite these processes. And so they are concerned that once these projects start to get underway, particularly if they start to fast track them, then there will be a lot of things missed. And these projects can potentially affect the way these things impact the environment. Now, the other part of that, as you mentioned, Georgia is a battleground state. Now, while the president will only be down there for an hour or so, he is trying to play to his base down there as well. Now, according to a CBS Battleground Tracker poll, Joe Biden is actually up 2 points in the recent polling that we've had there in Georgia. So the president is going down there to say that he has been to these states. I don't think in this manner is what some of the people who may be voting for the president would want him to be down there. Georgia is another one of those states that has issues in terms of a spiking coronavirus case. They also have other issues that have happened that we've seen in recent months, and that includes things like police reform and the police-involved shooting that happened in Atlanta a few weeks ago, and also things like voters' rights and things like that. And so there are a lot of things happening in Georgia that the president could speak to that he probably won't with this trip. And I think that is where you're going to start to see a shift. Now, according to Anthony Salvanto with our CBS News, he has said that Joe Biden is actually up because we're starting to see him play to a base that other Democrats in years past haven't been able to. And that speaks to things like college-educated women and things like that. While the president has his base, he's starting to see, Vice President Joe Biden is starting to see a rise in those numbers because he is playing to that growing base that's starting to come out and show support for him. Tanya.
All right. Well, Skyler Henry at the White House, thank you so much.
No problem.